The unlikely meeting. Captain Jake Carter moved carefully through the ruins of Sci-Fi. The war had turned this once beautiful planet into a graveyard of steel and fire. Smoke rose from the shattered buildings, and the sky was a dull shade of red from constant bombardments. Jake had seen many battlefields before, but something about this place felt different. His combat suit was covered in dust, and his rifle was gripped tightly in his hands. The enemy was everywhere. Mercenaries, criminals, and warlords, all fighting to take control of this dying planet. As he stepped over a pile of broken metal, his earpiece buzzed. "Captain, we lost contact with the Northern Patrol." "Something's out there," said his teammate, Harris. "Stay alert," Jake responded, scanning the area. Then he heard it, a soft rustling sound coming from the wreckage nearby. His instincts kicked in. Someone was there. Jake turned swiftly, raising his rifle. "Come out. Hands where I can see them," he commanded. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from behind a broken steel beam, a small figure stepped out. It was an alien, but not like any Jake had seen before. She was tiny, barely 4 feet tall, with pale blue skin and deep violet eyes. Her limbs were slender, her face delicate, but there was no fear in her expression. She wore a dark, torn cloak, and her short silver hair was messy from the dust. Jake's grip on the trigger tightened. "Who are you?" he demanded. The alien raised her small hands, not in fear, but in calm confidence. "My name is Myra," she said in perfect English, "and you need to listen to me if you want to survive." Jake narrowed his eyes. This was a war zone. He didn't have time for strange aliens making demands. "Oh yeah? And why should I trust you?" he asked. Myra sighed. "Because, Captain Carter, in exactly 3 minutes, a squad of heavily armed mercenaries will be here. And if you don't move now, you will die." Jake's mind raced. How did she know his name? And was she telling the truth? He glanced at his scanner. No signs of movement, yet. "I don't take orders from random aliens," he said coldly. Myra took a slow step forward. Her size made her seem harmless, but her eyes were sharp. "I am not random," she replied, "and I just saved your life." Before Jake could ask what she meant, his earpiece crackled again. "Captain, movement incoming. At least 10 hostiles. They're heading straight for you." Harris' voice was filled with panic. Jake cursed under his breath. She was right. Myra gave him a knowing look. "Now do you believe me?" There was no time to think. If she was telling the truth, then standing here meant death. Jake lowered his rifle slightly but kept his guard up. "All right, short stuff. Where do we go?" Myra didn't hesitate. She turned and started running toward a narrow alley between 2 collapsed buildings. "Follow me." Jake hesitated for only a second before following her. She was small but fast, slipping through the rubble like she had done this 100 times before. Behind them, distant shouting and heavy boots echoed through the ruins. The mercenaries had arrived. "They're tracking us," Jake muttered. "They'll find us." Myra suddenly stopped beside a large piece of fallen metal and placed her hand on a small hidden panel. The low hum filled the air, and before Jake could react, a hidden door slid open in the ground. Jake's eyes widened. A secret bunker. Myra smirked. "You're not the only one with secrets, Captain." Without waiting for a response, she jumped inside. Jake hesitated for only a second before following her, and the door slid shut just as the mercenaries reached the area. Inside, the bunker was small but advanced. Screens flickered with alien symbols, and strange devices lined the walls. Jake turned to Myra. "Okay, start talking. Who are you really? And why the hell do these guys want you dead?" Myra crossed her arms. "Because I know something they don't. Something that could change this entire war." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Myra's violet eyes locked onto his. "I mean, Captain Carter, the war isn't about what you think it is. And if we don't stop them," Humanity won't survive. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had fought many battles, but this was something different. And for the first time, he realized he needed her just as much as she needed him. The impossible escape. The bunker was dimly lit, filled with a soft hum of alien technology. Jake's eyes darted across the strange screens, glowing with unreadable symbols. The place looked old but well-maintained, as if someone had been living here for a while. Myra moved with ease, pressing a few buttons on a console. A holographic map flickered to life above the table, displaying the ruined city above them. Small red dots moved across the screen. Mercenary patrols. Jake stepped forward, crossing his arms. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." Myra barely looked at him. "No time. They're searching for us." "Then make time." She finally turned to face him. Though she was barely 4 feet tall, her gaze was intense, sharp, and full of confidence. "You humans think war is all about firepower, don't you?" she said. "You think if you have the biggest ships, the best weapons, and the strongest soldiers, you win. But that's not how the real war works." Jake narrowed his eyes. "And what makes you the expert?" Myra exhaled and leaned against the console. "Because I've been fighting it a lot longer than you have." That caught Jake off guard. She didn't look like a warrior. No scars, no battle-worn armor. Just a petted alien with quick hands and sharp eyes. "You're going to have to give me more than cryptic words, Myra." She hesitated for a second. Then, finally, she spoke. "I am not just some lost alien. I am Myra Valcerin, last scientist of the Ardian Republic. My people were wiped out by the very mercenaries hunting us now." Jake frowned. He had never heard of the Ardian Republic. As if reading his thoughts, Myra continued. "That's because we were erased from history. The mercenaries you call warlords. They were once our soldiers. We created them, and they destroyed us." Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. "And now they're after you." "They don't want me," Myra corrected. "They want what I know." Before Jake could press further, a sudden beeping sound filled the bunker. Myra's eyes widened. "They found the entrance," she whispered. Jake's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle and checked his ammo. "Do we have another exit?" Myra was already moving, typing frantically into the console. "Yes, but it's not simple." A loud thud echoed from above. Something heavy had landed on the bunker's entrance. "No time for simple. Just get us out of here." The console beeped, and suddenly, the floor beneath them began to shift. A circular panel slid open, revealing the deep, dark tunnel. "Jump," Myra ordered. Jake looked down. It was a straight drop. "How deep?" he asked. "You'll survive," Myra said, and before Jake could argue, she leaped into the darkness. Damn it. Jake heard the first explosion above as the bunker's entrance was breached. No choice now. He took a deep breath and jumped. The fall and the chase. The drop was faster than he expected. His boots hit the ground hard, but the suit's impact absorbers kept him from breaking anything. He turned to see Myra already moving, leading him through an underground tunnel filled with ancient-looking pipes and cables. The air was damp, and the tunnel was barely big enough for him to move comfortably. Above them, muffled gunfire and shouting echoed through the ground. "They're coming," Jake muttered. "I know," Myra replied. "That's why we need to run." She sprinted ahead with surprising speed, weaving through tight corners. Jake followed, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. Then he heard it. The clanking of metal, the sound of mechanical legs crawling through the tunnel. Jake stole a quick glance behind him and felt his stomach drop. Hunter drones, small, spider-like machines with sharp metal limbs, glowing red eyes, and built-in plasma cannons. The mercenaries had released them into the tunnel, and they were fast. "Drones incoming," Jake yelled. "I know. Keep running." The tunnel narrowed, forcing Jake to crouch slightly as he ran. The drones weren't affected. They crawled along the ceiling, gaining speed. One of them fired. A blast of plasma struck the tunnel wall, sending shards of rock flying. Jake cursed. He turned mid-run and fired a shot, hitting one of the drones, but it only slowed it down. "Myra, tell me you have a plan." Just a few more meters. The tunnel suddenly opened up into a massive underground chamber, a hidden water reservoir. There, on the other side of a narrow metal bridge, was a sleek, compact alien ship. Jake's eyes widened. "That's your ship?" Myra didn't answer. She was already sprinting across the bridge. Jake followed, but the drones were right behind him. One leaped forward, claws extended. Jake spun and fired a shot straight through its core. The drone exploded in midair, but 3 more were closing in. "Jump onto the ship," Myra yelled, already inside the cockpit. Jake didn't have time to think. The bridge was crumbling. The drones were inches away. He pushed off with everything he had, leaping through the air, and landed hard on the ship's exterior. The engines roared to life. The ship lifted off, leaving the drones behind. Jake rolled onto his back, breathing heavily. Then, through the open cockpit, he saw Myra smirking. "Not bad for a human," she said. Jake let out a breathless laugh. Not bad for a tiny alien. The ship blasted out of the underground chamber, into the open sky of Typhos 7. But the real fight was just beginning. The hidden truth. The small alien ship shot through the dark skies of Typhos 7, its engines glowing bright blue. Below, the ruins of the city stretched endlessly, burned-out buildings, shattered vehicles, and smoke rising in thick clouds. War had turned this planet into a graveyard. Inside the cockpit, Jake Carter sat strapped into the co-pilot's seat, gripping the armrest as Myra piloted like a daredevil. The ship banked hard to the right, dodging an incoming plasma blast from a pursuing mercenary cruiser. "Tell me you have weapons on this thing," Jake shouted over the alarms. Myra's small fingers danced over the controls. "This ship isn't built for war." Jake cursed. "Then what the hell is it built for?" "Speed." She jerked the controls, and the ship dropped into a tight canyon, flying dangerously close to the rocky cliffs. The mercenary cruiser followed, its massive frame struggling to navigate the twists and turns. Jake's fingers twitched over his rifle. He hated not having control. "They're gaining on us." Myra smirked. "Watch this." She pressed a button, and suddenly, the ship's thrusters released a burst of superheated gas. The shockwave slammed into the pursuing cruiser, sending it spiraling into the canyon walls. Jake whistled. "Not bad." Myra's smirk grew. "Told you I know what I'm doing." With the danger behind them, the ship soared upward, escaping into the upper atmosphere. Only now did Jake take a deep breath and lean back. "All right," he said, his voice calmer now. "Start talking. What's really going on?" Myra tapped a few controls, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the cockpit. It showed a massive underground structure buried beneath Typhos 7. Jake frowned. "What is that?" Myra leaned forward, her violet eyes serious. "That, Captain Carter, is the reason this war is happening. The truth about the artifact." Jake studied the display. The underground structure looked ancient, with layers of tunnels, chambers, and strange symbols carved into the rock. "This isn't human-made," he muttered. "No," Myra agreed. "It's far older than humanity. Older than my people, even." Jake glanced at her. "Then who built it?" Myra's fingers tightened on the control panel. "No one knows, but we call them the precursors, the first civilization to ever exist in this galaxy." Jake exhaled. He had heard whispers of lost alien civilizations before, but most were myths. Stories told by deep space explorers, but Myra spoke as if she had proof. She pointed at the hologram. "This site contains something more than ruins, something more powerful than any weapon." Jake's jaw tightened. "A superweapon." Myra shook her head. "No. Worse." She zoomed in on a specific chamber deep within the structure. It was shaped like a vault, with massive alien inscriptions covering its walls. Inside that vault is an object known as the core. It's not a weapon. It's a source of knowledge. Whoever controls it will gain access to everything the precursors left behind. Their technology, their history, maybe even their power. Jake stared at her. "You're saying this thing could make someone a god?" Myra's voice was grim. "That's exactly why the warlords want it. The enemy's plan." Jake leaned back, running a hand through his hair. This was worse than he thought. If the mercenaries got their hands on this core, it wouldn't just mean the fall of Typho 7. It would mean the fall of every weaker species in the galaxy. "How do you know all this?" Jake asked. Myra hesitated before answering. "Because my people found the core first. We studied it, tried to understand it. We didn't want it to fall into the wrong hands." Her voice lowered. "But we weren't fast enough." Jake saw something rare in her eyes. Pain. "The mercenaries came for us," she continued. "We fought, but we weren't warriors. We were scientists. They slaughtered us, took everything we had." Jake's grip tightened. He had seen enough war to know what that meant. "And now they're here," he muttered, "trying to finish what they started." Myra nodded. "And if they unlock the core, nothing will stop them." Silence filled the cockpit. The weight of the situation pressed down on them. Jake finally exhaled. "So what's the plan?" Myra turned to him, determination burning in her violet eyes. "We get to the core before they do." Jake let out a dry chuckle. "You make it sound easy. It won't be. Do we even know how to stop it from falling into their hands?" Myra's face hardened. "Yes." She tapped a button, and the display changed to show a countdown timer. Jake's stomach dropped. "What the hell is that?" "The failsafe." Myra's voice was steady. "If we can't stop them from reaching the core, we destroy it." Jake's eyes widened. "You want to blow up an ancient alien artifact?" Myra nodded. "Better it be lost forever than in the wrong hands." A dangerous alliance. Jake sat in silence for a moment, considering everything. He had fought in wars, seen entire planets fall to chaos and greed. He knew what would happen if the mercenaries got their hands on something this powerful. They had to stop it. But looking at Myra, this small 4-foot-tall alien with a brilliant mind and unshakable resolve, he realized something else. She wasn't just fighting for revenge. She wasn't just trying to survive. She was fighting for something bigger. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. Jake sighed. "All right, short stuff. I'm in." Myra raised an eyebrow. "Took you long enough." Jake smirked. "I like to weigh my options." Myra turned back to the controls, inputting new coordinates. "Then buckle up, Captain. Because once we land, there's no turning back." The ship roared forward, heading straight for the heart of the storm. The final battle for the core had begun. The betrayal and the test of strength. The alien ship glided through the dark clouds over Sci-Fi 7, heading straight toward the coordinates of the hidden core chamber. Inside the cockpit, Jake Carter double-checked his rifle while Myra fine-tuned their approach. Their mission was simple in theory: reach the core before the mercenaries did, either secure it or destroy it. In practice, it was a suicide run. Jake glanced at Myra. The tiny alien was focused, her violet eyes locked on the control panel. For someone barely 4 feet tall, she carried herself like a giant. "Any chance we don't get shot out of the sky the moment we land?" he asked. Myra smirked. "Optimism doesn't suit you, Captain." Jake chuckled. "I'll take that as a no." As the ship neared the surface, a sudden beeping cut through the cockpit. Myra frowned and pressed a button. A transmission signal appeared on the screen, a human distress beacon. Jake's expression hardened. "That's a military signal." Myra hesitated. It could be a trap, or it could be survivors. A voice crackled through the speakers, male, urgent, and desperate. "This is Lieutenant Reynolds of the 5th Expeditionary Unit. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Hostile forces are closing in. Request immediate extraction. Jake clenched his jaw. I know that voice. Reynolds is one of ours. Myra studied him. And I don't leave my own behind. Myra exhaled. Fine, but if this gets us killed, I get to say I told you so. The trap. The ship touched down in the ruins of an old military outpost. Scorched walls and wrecked vehicles told a clear story. This place had been through hell. Jake stepped out first, rifle raised, scanning the area. Silence. Then, movement. From behind a collapsed bunker, a group of human soldiers emerged. Their uniforms were torn, their faces bruised, but Jake recognized them. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar down his cheek, stepped forward. Captain Carter. Jake lowered his rifle slightly. Reynolds. The lieutenant exhaled. Dan, it's good to see another friendly face. Myra stood at Jake's side, her arms crossed. You called for an extraction. Reynolds nodded. We were ambushed. The mercenaries hit us hard. Most of my unit is dead, but we've been holding out here, waiting for reinforcements. Jake frowned. Reinforcements aren't coming. Command thinks this planet is a lost cause. Reynolds' expression darkened. Figures. Then, a single second of hesitation. Jake caught it. The shift in Reynolds' stance. The way his soldiers tensed. The way his hand hovered just a little too close to his sidearm. Something was wrong. Reynolds. Jake's voice dropped. Who else have you been talking to? The answer came not in words, but in action. Reynolds moved first. He lunged, grabbing Jake's rifle barrel and jerking it sideways just as one of his men opened fire. Jake barely twisted in time, the plasma bolt missing him by an inch. He slammed his elbow into Reynolds' ribs and threw himself backward. Myra reacted instantly. She ducked low, moving with inhuman speed, and kicked out Reynolds' leg. The lieutenant collapsed, but his soldiers weren't slowing down. Betrayal. Jake didn't have time to think, only to act. He rolled behind cover, firing a precise shot. One of the soldiers dropped. They sold us out, Myra shouted. Jake gritted his teeth. Of course they had. The mercenaries had gotten to them first. Reynolds scrambled back, blood on his lip. You don't understand, Carter. You think the government cares about you. About any of us. Jake didn't flinch. I don't care about politics. I care about loyalty. And you threw that away. Reynolds wiped his mouth. You have no idea what's coming. Then, an explosion. The entire battlefield shook as mercenary dropships roared in overhead. Jake's heart pounded. They led us right to them. Myra grabbed his wrist. We need to leave. Now. But Jake's eyes were locked on Reynolds. The man had made his choice. And now, he was the enemy. The test of strength. Jake and Myra sprinted through the ruins as mercenary soldiers poured in. Plasma bolts rained down, burning through concrete and steel. Jake turned, firing precise bursts, dropping enemies one by one. But they kept coming. We can't fight them all. Myra shouted. Jake reloaded. Then we run. They darted into a half-collapsed building, moving fast. The mercenaries followed. Jake knew they wouldn't escape unless they did something unexpected. He looked at Myra. How much do you weigh? She blinked. What? How much do you weigh? 40 kilos. Why? Jake didn't answer. He grabbed her and threw her onto the second-floor ledge above them. She yelped. What the hell? Go. I'll hold them off. She hesitated. Then she saw the look in his eyes, the determination, the fire. She nodded once. Then she was gone. Jake turned back, rifle raised. The first mercenary rounded the corner. Jake shot him between the eyes. The second one. Jake ducked under his swing, jammed his elbow into the man's throat, then finished him with a shot to the chest. Then, Reynolds appeared. Jake didn't hesitate. He swung the butt of his rifle, cracking Reynolds across the face. The lieutenant stumbled back, blood dripping down his chin. "You always were too loyal," Reynolds muttered, "even when it got you killed." Jake didn't answer, because Myra's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Jump. Now." Jake didn't question it. He turned and leaped off the edge of the building. The moment his feet left the ground, a massive explosion erupted behind him, consuming Reynolds and his forces. Jake hit the ground hard, rolling to his feet. Above him, Myra stood on the ledge, holding a detonator. She raised an eyebrow. "Still think I'm just a small alien?" Jake exhaled, grinning. "Remind me never to make you mad." She smirked. Too late. The battle was far from over. But together, they were just getting started. The heart of the storm. The ruins of Sci-Fi were on fire. Smoke filled the air, and the distant hum of approaching warships sent a chill through the battlefield. Jake Carter and Myra Valcerin had survived the betrayal, but the real fight was only beginning. Their small alien ship was hidden beneath the wreckage of a collapsed structure, but it wouldn't stay safe for long. The mercenaries were everywhere, and Reynolds' betrayal meant that the enemy knew exactly where they were going. Jake wiped the blood from his lip as he paced near the ship. His pulse was still hammering from the last fight. He had trusted Reynolds, and that trust had nearly gotten them killed. Myra, sitting on a rusted-out cargo crate, studied him carefully. "You're thinking too much," she said. Jake exhaled. "I trusted him, and he was weak," Myra said bluntly. "Some people break when they see the storm coming. Reynolds broke." Jake gave her a sidelong glance. "And what about you? What makes you so damn unbreakable?" Myra smirked. "Because I'm not fighting for myself. I'm fighting for something bigger." Jake let her words sink in. Then Myra tapped a button on her wrist device, and a holographic map appeared in midair. It showed a massive underground chamber beneath the city ruins, the core's location. "We have less than 6 hours before the mercenaries break through," she said. "If we're going to stop them, we need to move now." Jake frowned. "You still haven't told me how we're actually going to do this." Myra leaned forward. "Because you wouldn't like the answer." Jake crossed his arms. "Try me." Myra pointed to the deepest chamber on the map. "We don't just need to reach the core," she said. "We need to activate the failsafe." Jake narrowed his eyes. "And what exactly is the failsafe?" "It's complicated." Jake sighed. "Myra." The small alien hesitated before finally saying, "The failsafe will flood the entire chamber with unstable energy. Anyone still inside won't survive." Jake's jaw clenched, "Including us." Myra looked at him. "Yes." The descent. The entrance to the underground ruins was hidden beneath the remains of an old government bunker. Getting inside hadn't been easy. The tunnels were collapsing, and mercenary scouts were everywhere. They finally reached a massive, rusted doorway, half buried in rock and sand. Myra placed her small hand against the scanner, and ancient blue symbols flickered to life across the metal. The door rumbled. Then, slowly, it began to slide open. Beyond it lay darkness. Jake switched on his rifle's flashlight, illuminating the cavern ahead. The walls were covered in alien symbols, some glowing faintly in response to their presence. "No one's been down here in centuries," Myra whispered. Jake stepped inside, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Then let's hope we're alone." They weren't. The guardians of the core. As they moved deeper, the tunnels opened into a colossal chamber, stretching beyond the limits of their flashlights. Massive stone pillars loomed overhead, leading toward a single glowing pedestal in the center. And surrounding it were the guardians. Jake's breath caught as his light revealed them. Tall, mechanical figures, half buried in the ground. Their armor was ancient, their limbs rusted, but their eyes still glowed with eerie blue energy. "What the hell are those?" Jake whispered. Myra exhaled. "Security constructs. They were built to protect the core. And they don't care who we are. They'll kill anything that gets too close." Jake cursed. "And you didn't think to mention this before?" Myra gave a small shrug. "Would it have changed your mind?" Jake sighed. "No." The closest guardian twitched. Then, slowly, it began to move. Its head turned toward them. The blue light in its eyes flickered brighter. Then, it stood up. A fight against giants. Jake barely had time to react before the guardian charge. It moved faster than something that size should. The ground shook as its metal foot slammed down, sending a shockwave through the cavern. Jake rolled to the side just as a massive fist smashed into the stone where he had been standing. The impact sent rock shards flying. Myra was already moving, weaving between the other inactive guardians, trying to reach the pedestal. Jake didn't have that option. He raised his rifle and opened fire. The bullets pinged uselessly against the guardian's armored body. The construct turned its glowing eyes toward him and swung again. Jake barely dodged, feeling the air rush past his face. "Myra," he shouted, "tell me you've got a plan." The tiny alien had reached the pedestal. She was frantically typing into an ancient console, her fingers moving at lightning speed. "Almost there. Just keep it busy." Jake scowled. "Easy for you to say." The guardian charged again. Jake ran toward the nearest pillar, leading the construct into a tight space where its bulk would be harder to move. It swung. Jake ducked, and the guardian's own momentum carried it straight into the pillar. The massive stone cracked, and the guardian stumbled, momentarily stunned. That was his chance. Jake grabbed a detonator from his belt, primed it, and threw it. Boom! The explosion ripped through the guardian's back, sending it crashing to the ground in a pile of burning metal. Jake exhaled. One down. Then he heard movement. The other guardians were waking up. The race against time. Jake turned to Myra. "Whatever you're doing, do it now." Myra was sweating, her fingers flying over the console. The symbols above the pedestal began glowing brighter. "Got it." The ground shook violently. A deep, thunderous rumble echoed through the chamber as the failsafe activated. The guardians suddenly froze, then collapsed, their energy draining into the floor. Jake stared. That worked. Myra exhaled, stepping back from the console. "We bought ourselves a few minutes. But now, the core is waking up." Jake looked toward the pedestal. The central structure was shifting, revealing a massive, pulsing sphere of light. Jake frowned. "So, what happens now?" Myra looked at him. "Now, Captain Carter, we find out if we made the right choice." The core began to rise, and the entire cavern erupted with energy. The ultimate showdown. The core of the precursors floated above the pedestal, pulsating with a deep golden energy. The cavern walls trembled as ancient systems, long dormant, surged back to life. Strange holographic symbols flickered in the air, shifting and rearranging faster than the eye could follow. Jake Carter took a slow step forward, his instincts screaming at him to stay back. Myra stood beside him, her violet eyes locked on the floating artifact. "I don't like this," Jake muttered. Myra didn't respond. Her breathing had changed, sharp, focused. And then, a voice. Not a sound, exactly. More like a pressure inside their heads. An echo of something far too old to have a language, yet somehow, they understood. "You have come seeking the core." Jake tensed, his grip tightening on his rifle. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't Myra's either. It was something else. Something vast. "You are not the first. Many have come before." Jake's pulse pounded in his ears. What is this thing? Myra swallowed hard. The final test. Before Jake could ask what she meant, the holograms around the core shifted, forming the shape of a massive humanoid figure. It was made of pure energy, its form crackling with golden electricity. It had no face, just two burning orbs where eyes should be. "Prove your worth," the voice commanded. And then it attacked. A fight unlike any other. Jake barely dodged as a wave of golden energy slammed into the ground, leaving a smoking crater where he had been standing. He rolled behind a fallen pillar, breathing hard. "Myra, what the hell is this thing?" "A guardian of the core." Myra's voice was tense. "The last obstacle before access can be granted." "Obstacle?" Jake peeked out from cover. "That thing just tried to erase me from existence." The energy being turned toward Myra, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Your kind was not meant to wield the knowledge of the precursors." With a flick of its hand, a pulse of force slammed into Myra, sending her flying backward into a stone column. Jake's vision went red. No one touched his people. And whether she was human or not, Myra was his people now. Jake charged. He fired his rifle in short, precise bursts, aiming for the center of the being's mass. The bullets vanished on impact, dissolving into golden sparks. It wasn't working. The guardian turned, lifting its arm, and a glowing spear of energy formed in its hand. It threw the spear at Jake. He dove to the side just in time. The spear slammed into the ground, detonating in a wave of force that sent him skidding across the stone floor. "Damn it." Jake gritted his teeth, rolling onto one knee. His gun was useless. But maybe this thing wasn't built for hand-to-hand combat. The guardian advanced, stepping toward him with silent, predatory grace. Jake lunged forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. He feinted left, then dropped low and delivered a brutal uppercut to the guardian's core. Pain shot through his knuckles. The thing was solid, too solid. It barely reacted, then slammed a glowing fist into Jake's chest. Jake flew backward, hitting the ground hard. His vision blurred, the wind knocked out of him. This wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The power of the small. A soft groan from across the chamber caught Jake's attention. Myra was pulling herself up, blood trailing down her forehead. She was smaller, weaker, but she was still standing. And then she smiled. "You are making a mistake," she told the guardian. The beam turned toward her. "Explain." Myra wiped the blood from her lip. "You think strength is what determines worth." The guardian tilted its head. "It is the way of the galaxy." Myra stepped forward. "No," she said. "That's the way of the weak." Jake blinked. What was she doing? The strongest warriors, the biggest armies, the most advanced weapons, they all fall eventually. Myra's voice was steady. "Strength alone isn't enough." The guardian's eyes flickered. It was hesitating. And Jake suddenly realized this wasn't a battle of might. It was a battle of philosophy. Myra took another step forward, standing tiny before the massive being. True strength comes from understanding, from adapting, from thinking beyond the fight. The guardian didn't move. Then it lowered its hand. "You understand?" Myra nodded. "We do." The guardian turned its burning eyes toward Jake. "And what of you, warrior?" Jake hesitated. He could still feel the pain in his ribs, the brutality of the fight. But looking at Myra, he understood. Jake exhaled. "I used to think strength meant winning." He looked the guardian in the eyes. "Now I know it means knowing when to stop fighting." The guardian stood motionless for a long moment. Then the energy crackled, flickered, and slowly the beam began to dissolve. The test was over. Jake watched as the core dimmed, its energy stabilizing. The guardian's final words echoed in his mind. "You have proven yourselves worthy." And then the chamber fell silent. The final decision. Jake and Myra stood side by side, looking at the core. Jake exhaled. "So, what happens now?" Myra placed her small hand on the pedestal. The holographic symbol swirled, revealing a single glowing command. "One choice. We can take the knowledge." Myra's voice was quiet. "We can learn everything the precursors left behind. Change the galaxy forever." Jake studied the command. Or, Myra's face hardened. or we wipe it out. Make sure no one ever misuses this power." Jake stared at her. "And what do you want to do?" Myra hesitated. Then she pressed the second option. The core's light pulsed, and then dimmed forever. The knowledge of the precursors was gone. Jake let out a breath. "You really are something, short stuff." Myra smirked. "Took you long enough to notice." The cavern rumbled. They had to leave. Fast. As they ran toward their escape, Jake glanced at Myra. She had proven that strength wasn't about size or brute force. It was about knowing when to fight and when to let go. And maybe, just maybe, size never really mattered at all. Love in the aftermath. The chamber trembled as the core's energy finally collapsed, sending a deep vibration through the ruins of Sci-Fi 7. Jake and Myra didn't waste a second. They ran. Behind them, the once magnificent precursor vault began to crumble, the walls collapsing as the ancient power faded into darkness. The knowledge of the precursors, something that could have shaped the future of the galaxy, was now lost forever. Jake didn't regret it, because if the wrong hands had gotten hold of that knowledge, there wouldn't have been a future left to save. The last escape. They'd reached the outer tunnels, sprinting through the maze of ruins. The air was thick with dust, and the ground shook violently beneath them. "This whole place is coming down," Jake shouted. Myra, despite her small size, moved like a shadow, dodging falling debris with perfect agility. Jake, on the other hand, had to use his raw strength, smashing through obstacles rather than slipping around them. But they weren't alone. A distant roar of engines sent a chill down Jake's spine. Myra glanced at him. "They're coming." Jake didn't need to ask who. The mercenaries weren't going to let them leave. A squad of enemy soldiers descended into the collapsing ruins, their armor gleaming under the flickering emergency lights. Reynolds had sold them out, but his employers weren't finished yet. Jake raised his rifle. "Looks like we're doing this the hard way." Myra smirked. "You're getting predictable, Captain." The first shots rang out, plasma bolts slicing through the dust. Jake dove behind a fallen column, returning fire. He took down one mercenary, then another. But there were too many. They needed an exit. Fast. Myra's eyes darted around the chamber, calculating something. Then, suddenly, she turned to Jake. "I have an idea." Jake gritted his teeth. "Please tell me it doesn't involve me getting shot." Myra pressed a button on her wrist device. A distant explosion rocked the ruins above them. Jake's heart dropped. She just collapsed the only tunnel leading to their ship. "Myra, what the hell?" She grabbed his wrist. "Follow me." With no other choice, Jake ran after her. The mercenaries realized too late what was happening. By the time they tried to adjust their positions, Jake and Myra had vanished into a side tunnel, a hidden route the mercenaries hadn't mapped. The final confrontation. They emerged into the open night, the cold wind hitting their faces as they reached the surface. A mercenary dropship hovered above the ruins. Spotlights scanned the area, searching for them. Jake raised his rifle, prepared for a last stand. But Myra simply grinned. She tapped a small detonator on her belt. Boom. The mercenaries' own explosives, the ones they had planted earlier, detonated beneath their dropship. The ship lurched, spinning wildly, smoke pouring from its engines before it crashed into the ruins in a massive fireball. Jake blinked. "That was your plan." Myra smirked. "Told you I think ahead." Jake let out a breathless laugh. "I think I'm starting to like the way you think, short stuff." She elbowed him in the ribs. "You better." But before they could celebrate, another ship roared toward them from the horizon. Not a mercenary ship, a human warship. Jake's radio crackled to life. "Captain Carter, this is Commander Vasquez. We've been tracking enemy movements. Seems like you made quite the mess." Jake smirked, glancing at Myra. "Yeah, you could say that." "Need a ride?" Vasquez asked. Jake exhaled. "You have no idea." The aftermath. Hours later, Jake and Myra stood on the observation deck of the warship, watching as Sci-Fi 7 slowly disappeared behind them. The war on the planet wasn't over, but they had changed the game. The mercenaries had lost their greatest prize. The core was gone. Jake turned to Myra. She looked different now. Not physically. She was still the same tiny, brilliant alien who had proven time and time again that size didn't matter. But now, she was a legend. The petted alien who had outsmarted the strongest warlords. The scientist who had saved the galaxy from an unimaginable threat. And Jake. He had been part of it. He smirked. So what now? Myra tilted her head, her violet eyes studying him. Then, casually, she said, "You ever thought about working with a genius?" Jake laughed. "I already am." She rolled her eyes. "I meant full-time." Jake exhaled, leaning against the railing. The war wasn't over. The galaxy was still filled with people who wanted power they didn't deserve. But maybe, just maybe, he and Myra could change that. He looked down at her and grinned. "You got yourself a deal. Short stuff." Myra smirked. And together, they stepped into the future.